for spending some of your time with me here tonight. But before we get into the show, I figured since this is my first video on this channel, it would make a lot of sense to kind of go through my background watching wrestling so you guys know kind of the lens that I am viewing everything through, because I do not know a lot of the history of these newer wrestlers. I started watching WWE when I was very, very little, maybe like 8 through 13 years old. I remember I was the biggest mark for John Cena. I would wear his shirts to school, even the armbands and headbands and everything. It was crazy. But I kind of got out of it. I think it was when, or the last thing I remember is when The Undertaker actually lost his mania streak to Brock Lesnar, the Beast incarnate. And I don't think it was because The Undertaker lost at WrestleMania that I was like, screw this, I'm not watching it anymore. But I was looking back to kind of see the last thing I remembered. And I remember WrestleMania 30 in that match. And I didn't remember the main event or any matches from WrestleMania 31, so I must have stopped around there. And then I didn't watch it for the longest time. However, recently my sister's boyfriend at the time was very big into the WWE, and hearing him talk about it kind of piqued my interest a little bit, and then I started watching some YouTube videos about it and getting a little more accustomed to everybody and everything that was going on. And I actually started getting back into wrestling through watching for the first time the 90s era of WWF and the Attitude Era, because I was curious what all the hype was about. You know, whenever you ask anyone on the internet, the best that WWE has ever been, majority of the time they're going to say that era. So I have watched every single Raw and pay-per-view from January 1st in 1995 until the King of the Ring in 1998. That is what I'm currently up to. And for those who don't know, that is the pay-per-view where Undertaker wrestled Mankind in the Hell in a Cell match, where he threw Mankind 16 feet through the announce table from the top of the cell. And as I'm watching this 90s wrestling, I then started watching some of the big, events going on. So as John Cena is retiring, I'm getting kind of back into wrestling. I'm realizing that I actually do want to see the end of John Cena's career, so I started watching some of the Raws when he would come on, like when he won the Intercontinental Championship. And I then watched the Saturday night's main event for Cena's last match against Gunther, and after that, I watched the Royal Rumble in Riyadh, this past Royal Rumble, that Roman and Liv won. And ever since then, I have been watching the weekly shows since January. I've been watching every Raw and SmackDown, and then a little after, I started watching all the NXTs as well. So that is kind of everything that I know from July. I have all of the more recent storylines. However, some of the history I do not know, but they also talk about it a lot on commentary, so I kind of know some of the storylines and who's been a world champion and stuff like that. So let's jump into the show. I have notes here in front of me that I took while watching the slightly kind of over here. That is what I am doing. Bear with me. I don't think I can memorize an entire 2.5 hour or 3 hour program. But it starts off with an Oba promo. And this was in London, by the way, so I don't know if it was because it was not one of the stadiums they're used to. You know, they're used to the NBA arenas in the US for the most part. But when Oba was doing his entrance, that spot where in the entrance where he goes into the ring and kind of hits his pose and the spotlight comes down, there was no spotlight on him, and I don't know if this was a botch or if this was just a limitation of the stadium in London, but they still turned off all of the lights, so you can just like barely make out that he was hitting his pose, but it was still, there was just no light on him. He was hitting his pose and there was no spotlight, so it was kind of awkward. But other than that, Oba is doing a great job. It's very surprising to me that he got his little, I shouldn't say little, but his strut over with the crowd and everybody's doing it and having a great time. And it's just surprising to me that he can get something like a strut over. Anything can get over these days, I suppose. His promo was okay. It's kind of a generic promo, just saying that he has destiny on his side and he is going to win the King of the Ring. And then he asks the crowd if when he wins King of the Ring, he should challenge for the undisputed WWE title, and implying Cody Rhodes. He doesn't actually say the name Cody Rhodes, but the crowd boos that choice, and then he asks for the World Heavyweight title, and everyone goes crazy because they want to see the Ruler versus the OTC. That is what was teased after in the WrestleMania post-show, and that is what people want to see. But it's at this point that you hear Jey Uso's music, and he interrupts the promo, and he comes out and does his full entrance, which I know, I believe on the internet it gets a lot of hate. I do think it is all in good fun. I do think it's a good entrance, and it is like, if I was there in the stadium, I would want to be eating. It seems like a fun place to be. However, in this specific example, it's like an extended entrance, like it goes longer than it usually does. He hits the one spot, he comes down from the crowd, and then he stands up on that corner turnbuckle like he does, and when, you know, he does the main eating part, but then he kind of repped it for another kind of round of eats. And then after that, he still ran it back, even though Oba was trying to tell him, like, just do not you dare to run it back, but he runs it back anyway. So I do think this specific time it was a bit excessive, but you cannot stop him from eating, I guess. So Jay then begins to cut his promo where basically he says people doubted him when he was wrestling Gunther at WrestleMania, and he beat Gunther, and people are doubting him against Oba because Oba is huge and Jay is not. But he is just saying that he will still come out on top because he has been doubted before. And then he says that he's going to, of course, be the undisputed WWE champion after SummerSlam because he would not challenge the Tribal Chief. And I should mention, at this point in his promo, he is like completely out of breath at this point. As we know, the entrance takes a lot out of Jay. And I mean, fair enough, it is a lot of movement, but he also likes in his promos to yell a lot. He is always yelling, and when he's not yelling, he is making like noises in between his words all the time. You know, he's always saying oos, or like grunting in between his lines. So he's just using a lot of breath. So he is basically completely out of breath at this point. But he's still able to say that this is Oba's warning shot. Pow! And then he says, "If you shoot your shot, you better not miss, because I will destroy you, destroy you, destroy you. And even if you hit, I will still destroy you," basically saying he's not worried about Jay at all. And then he doubles down on that by saying that Jay is, just outright says that Jay is not the family member he is most worried about. And he tells him to take his bullet, his warning shot, and deliver it to his cousin, courtesy of the ruler. So I think that was a pretty good ending to the promo. I think that kind of saved it. He actually used Jay's warning shot gimmick against him, and I think that was kind of the best part of the promo. It wasn't just saying that I'm gonna, win the match and whatnot. It then goes to Adam Pearce, the general manager, and he is on the phone. And LA Knight interrupts him on the phone and is asking him who he's talking to, and basically saying, "Oh, are you on the phone with Roman? Are you on the phone with the Bloodline?" Because he is going through this kind of paranoia storyline where he kind of thinks that the deck is stacked against him, which is kind of ironic, considering outside of kayfabe, Hunter actually legitimately does not seem to want to push LA Knight. So now they're kind of using that, but saying that it's the Bloodline. So it's just kind of an interesting parallel story there. And they kind of just recaps last week. He asks him how he let Fatu do that to Eric Andre, which, if you didn't know, Eric Andre was on Raw last week, and he got splashed by Jacob Fatu like twice. And then he's complaining that he was beating up the Usos with a steel chair, and then Fatu comes out and hits him with the Tongan death grip. And then Jimmy kind of interrupts this segment, and he's asking LA Knight, telling LA Knight that he was the only one in the Bloodline that had some level of respect for LA Knight, because they have teamed in the past. So he's asking why LA Knight wouldn't do that to him, of all people in the Bloodline. And then it kind of breaks down and they all start arguing, and then Adam Pearce just makes the match for LA Knight versus Jimmy Uso for later in the night. The next segment is the Women's Tag Team Championship match. And right here in my notes, I just kind of point out the fact that before the match even started, I'm very, very confident that Paige and Brie are going to retain here, because it's in London. So, I mean, the hometown thing isn't always a guarantee, but Bayley and Lyra have been jobbing out and losing the majority of their matches for months at this point. Ever since I've been watching, I've only seen them lose in big spots. They have not won anything major. So to have them, they're basically getting fed to Paige and Brie tonight. But then the match actually starts. They have the entrances, and Lyra's entrance, they've gotta figure out Lyra's entrance. There's something there with, the woos that she does, but it's just out of sync. Lyra doesn't know when to do it. The crowd doesn't know when to do it. The music doesn't seem to be super clear on when to do it. I think in previous weeks she had it a little bit better, and I think there is a certain spot in the music that it works, but then sometimes Lyra would raise her arms at the complete wrong time in the song, and the crowd doesn't know what to do. And like I said, there's something there, but they gotta figure it out. I don't understand how they don't have it figured out. I'm assuming that she had this song in NXT or, wherever she was before WWE. I don't think they just came up with this out of nowhere, so I'm not really sure why it doesn't work well, but yeah, they've got to get that figured out. I also just don't understand why the team of Lyra and Bayley come out to Lyra's theme when Bayley is a former world champion. That didn't make sense to me either. But I guess it doesn't really matter for reasons we will get to, as their time as a tag team is likely coming to an end. So, during the match, there isn't really any crazy spots. And the finish is Lyra hits Paige with a suplex, and then she kind of rolls it over to do a second one, but gets countered going for the second suplex, and Paige actually picks her up and hits the rampage for the 1, 2, 3, and the finish, and they are still the women's tag team champions. And I remember thinking that it was a bit of an abrupt finish. Like I said, there wasn't any really cool spots in the match. There was no storytelling in the match that they were building towards. It kind of was just, random moves and then the finish, so it felt kind of abrupt, and it was also, like I said, an obvious result, so it wasn't a very good match in my opinion. I'm also curious how long Paige and Brie will hold these titles. I'm kind of surprised they've had them for as long as they have. I figured shortly after Mania they would drop them, considering, they weren't a planned team, so usually that does not bode well for their teaming efforts. I figured they would want Paige to be more of a single star, and I think they probably do. But I guess the obvious answer is that they're waiting for Nikki's ankle to heal so that the Bella Twins proper can have a title run. But I was surprised at how long they're holding the titles, because they've defended them a lot and they have won every single time. I thought for sure the Irresistible Forces would get their get back at some point, but it is not going to happen. And then I have in my notes just saying, how long will Bayley job out every week? Like I said, she is a former world champion, and I haven't seen her win a big match in a couple months. I also feel like the WWE is getting a little excessive with their obsession with the and new and the and still. They kind of are beating it to death, in my opinion. I don't remember when I was younger that being such a thing, and maybe it was, and I was a little kid, so I just never picked up on it. But they use it all the time now. I get, obviously the ring announcer is going to say it because that's what they've always said, and that's kind of why it became a thing. But Corey Graves, like when they're watching, or when they're playing the highlight package, and she hits the rampage, and they count to 1, 2, 3, Corey Graves just says, and still. And that's it. All he says is, and still, because in your mind you're supposed to fill in the rest, but it's like, I just feel like they're doing too much with that. It's like, yeah. But anyways, after the match, the kind of big thing, after, the highlight reel and all of that, Bayley and Lyra are still in the ring, so you kind of get an inkling that something is going on, because that's not usually how it works. And lo and behold, Lyra actually turns heel on Bayley and attacks Bayley. And I didn't really understand this. I was very surprised, so I guess that's good, but I don't really think it made sense, so I'm not going to say it was a good heel turn, because Lyra got pinned completely clean. It was a very clean finish. She got hit by the rampage. There was no interference from Brie and no interference from Bayley. She got pinned clean, and now she is turning heel on Bayley. It just didn't make a ton of sense to me. And even the commentators are pointing it out that she was the one that got pinned, so even the booking is like trying to kind of say that this was a decision that didn't really make sense, so I'm not really sure what they're going for. And then it's like, what are they going to feud now? These two people that you have had losing match after match for months are going to feud, and it's like, are people going to care about this feud? I don't know. I know people like Bayley, but I just don't see it. I just don't see it. They haven't done much recently, so I don't know if their feud is going to be going anywhere. The next segment was a Chad Gable promo. Chad Gable comes out. They actually debuted this song. They debuted this song last week, but I feel like I need to mention it here, just that it's a really bad entrance theme. It just sounds like AI country slop. Really, it's like they put into ChatGPT to write an American country song, and it's just not good. It's not good, and it sucks because he really needs to get his push right now to capitalize on that mask versus mask match. That is the entire point of this. And I just don't really like the theme. So he's on his apology tour right now after being the original El Grande Americano. He was apologizing to all of the luchadors. But he's not apologizing to a luchador today. Instead, he brings out the Alpha Academy to apologize to them. I don't believe the Alpha Academy have been on TV in a very long, well, maybe not very long, but in a decently long time at this point. But Maxine, well, aside from Maxine, but still, I mean, it's been a while since our matches with Nettie, so Maxine, Otis, and Tozawa come out to the ring, and he apologizes to each of them individually, and again, like I was saying, I do not know, I'm not familiar with their history in the Alpha Academy, so I can't speak to how good the references are, how good the promo is in that sense, but it seems like Chad and Otis are actually real friends outside of kayfabe, so they're kind of using that, and Otis is going to shake his hand. But Maxine steps in before Otis can shake his hand and kind of tells him that they're not going to accept his apology for being selfish and, using them. And she says that achieving what he could not achieve, which is winning the Intercontinental title, showed her that they do not need him, which I guess is fair enough. But it's pretty obvious that they're booking Maxine to be a heel at this point. Everybody has seen her talking to Austin Theory in the backstage segments, Austin Theory of the Vision, and now she is refusing the apology of Chad Gable and taking Otis and Tozawa with her, so they're just kind of booking her as a heel, so we will see what happens with that. After that, there is a match between Ethan Page and Dragon Lee. Before the match, Ray goes up to Dragon Lee and tells him that they need to teach Ethan Page some respect for what he and Rusev did to Rey Mysterio. Ripping his mask off. That was mainly Rusev, but Ethan was involved, so I guess I understand it. They actually hit Page with the jobber entrance, which I don't understand considering they are pushing the NXT guys, so I don't know why they would jobber entrance him. But it's fine by me considering they changed his song and they kind of made it worse in my opinion, so it is what it is. Then Dragon Lee comes out, and I wasn't sure if Dragon Lee had new music. It kind of seemed like new music. I don't think it was anything I have heard before, but I also could not tell you for a fact what Dragon Lee's old music was, so I don't really know, but it seemed like new. I didn't recognize it. And then I have in my notes here, before the match even started, that since Chad beat Rusev last week, I think it's pretty obvious that they're going to let Paige go over on Dragon Lee tonight to kind of balance out the heels and faces in this Intercontinental, title race, title division. And that is what ends up happening. But this match did have a couple of notable spots. The first one being when Ethan Page grabs and twists Dragon Lee's mask so he cannot see. He's just completely blinded by his own mask, and then Page kind of kicks him a couple times until he rolls out of the ring and is able to fix it. So I thought that was a fun spot and a fun little heel spot for Page. And then Dragon Lee does this move where he does like a suicide dive swanton bomb onto the announce table. So he doesn't jump over the ropes, he jumps through the middle rope and front flips onto the announce table to hit Page, but he actually just pretty much completely misses Page and slams his back announce table, and it looked like it hit really hard. I apologize if you heard my upstairs neighbors just then. But yeah, so he does the front flip through the suicide dive and just lands on the table completely, barely touching Paige, and it looked very painful. But the finish of the match is that Dragon Lee is setting up for the Styles Clash. He hits the AJ Styles emote, but as he has Paige in position for the Styles Clash, he kind of like gets up really fast to basically just low blow headbutt him. And then he hits him with his finisher, which they are calling the Egoplex, which is basically just a fisherman suplex. And then he gets the pin with the Egoplex and wins the match. But I don't really like this finisher. There's really no pizzazz to it. It really is just a fisherman suplex. It's a suplex, he grabs his legs, and that's it. That's the whole move. There's really nothing special to it, and I don't understand because I feel like I hadn't seen him use that move in NXT. In NXT, he had the Twisted Grin, which was basically like the twist of fate from Jeff Hardy. And to me, it's just a way better finishing move. There's more to it. And I just think Twisted Grin is like a very funny, or not funny, but it's like a clever little name. And, twist, for lack of a better term, on the Twist of Fate name. And he does his little emote with his smile and pointing to his Twisted Grin. So I feel like it's a much better finisher than just this Egoplex. And I think he should, go back to that moving forward. They then announced that WWE Unreal Season 3 is going to be airing in July, and I will not be watching it or reacting to it at all. And part of that is just because there is enough WWE content for the week as it is, especially now that I'm going to be trying to record these videos for you guys and take notes on all these shows. Between Raw, SmackDown, NXT, the PLEs, there is a lot of content, especially this weekend is brutal. You have Night of Champions on Saturday, and NXT has the Great American Bash PLE on Sunday, so it is loaded. But outside of just the amount of WWE content and not having any more room for it, I don't really like the complete and utter destruction of kayfabe. I understand with the internet, kayfabe is pretty much dead in the traditional sense. Like, nobody believes what they're seeing is actually real. I think even in the 80s with Hogan, like even back then, I think the adults kind of knew what was going on. But I do think as a kid, even up until the 2000s, before social media really blew up and younger and younger kids got access to the internet, like I feel like believed that John Cena was actually that guy. I remember being mad when The Rock came back and beat him at WrestleMania because I had never heard of The Rock and he just came in and beat my goat, and I don't think I was mad at that from a booking perspective. I think it genuinely was like, how did he beat my guy? But I think today there's none of that. Even the young kids kind of know, I feel like, what's going on, unless they're super young, just because of the iPad kid epidemic, if you will. But I think kayfabe is still alive and well, just in a different way, and it doesn't hit as often. I think this WrestleMania had a really good example where the Brock Lesnar retirement spot, I think pretty much everyone believed was a real retirement. Now you could argue that maybe it should have been, and that's why everyone believed it, but when he flashes that X, that's using what the internet knows, kind of against them, and kind of building on kayfabe. And then by not telling Paul Heyman and getting that a reaction and the emotional reaction out of both of them, only for him to come back in, a month and a half or a couple months, whatever it was, and attack Oba again, I think was a good recent example of kayfabe kind of being a little bit different, but still definitely existing. But having a show where you show every single step and how exactly to a T it happens, I think is not that good for the product. segment with the Vision. It is Logan, it is Braun, and it is Austin Theory. I almost said Bronson, just because Braun and Bronson are connected in my mind, but there is no Paul Heyman. He's been missing for a couple weeks now that I actually think about it, but they give kind of generic promos, just because they have the tag match for the world titles against these Street Profits tonight, so they cut their promo saying they're going to win the match. But I wanted to note this. There's something I wanted to note from this segment, and that was Braun Breaker, when he is outside in the ring and he's cutting promos, he is always like yelling. He's yelling all of his words because he's just kind of like a ball of energy and just kind of like, a freak athlete, super fast guy, right? Super energetic guy. But in this interview, when he's like kind of backstage, he gives a more soft-spoken promo, like a soft-spoken, more like intense, like I don't want to say intimate, but that's kind of the words coming to mind right now, like a more intense, direct promo with a more soft-spoken, intense voice. And I think it actually worked really well for him here, and I think he should stick to that instead of just defaulting to yelling, because yelling is kind of easier to do, There is then a Solruka video package, and I just wanted to mention that news story where Solruka is like getting off of social media because of to be fair, she has been botching a lot, so it makes a lot of sense that the internet would be talking about her a lot. But I think it's just best for her to get off social media. I think that's a smart move because she needs to focus on her in-ring performance right now. I think I'm rooting for her. Personally, I'm not like upset at the botches. I think it's fair. I learned, because I was looking into it, that the NXT ropes are actually different from the WWE ropes, because I was like, she never missed a Soul Snatcher in the months I was watching NXT, and then she missed like 2 out of 3 on Raw. So I was looking into it, and apparently the ropes in NXT are different, which doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. You would think that they would want it to be exactly the same, but so yeah, she's getting off social media. I think that's best for her, and I'm rooting for the best for Solruka, obviously, as I think most people are, but I could definitely see people getting a little bit tired of her. But I think that the juice is going to be worth the squeeze in the end. So the next segment is an Io Sky promo. Io Sky comes out to the ring because she has a Queen of the Ring finals match against Liv Morgan at Night of Champions. And Jackie Redmond is in the ring, and she's kind of interviewing her, asking her about the match. And I was just thinking to myself, like, how has Liv Morgan made it this far in this tournament? How has she been allowed to make it this far in this tournament? I feel like there's no way she could win the match. I feel like she shouldn't have even made it this far, but now, especially with Rhea's injury, there's absolutely no way she could win the match, because if somehow Rhea's knee is actually very bad and she is not able to go at SummerSlam, you would have no opponent for Liv. Not that I think they were ever planning on making Liv a double champion, but now even more so with Rhea's injury, you can't be relying on her that hard. So I already thought before the Rhea injury that Io had to win, but I'm fairly confident that Io has to win now. And I'm not sure who she would challenge, because I do think that they have the whole Rhea and Io kind of tag team situation, that if they want to pull for that for a match for some story, or if they want to just have Io say, alright, I beat you once and I'm going to beat you again because I know I can. That could make sense. Maybe protect Rhea if her knee is not back to 100% by SummerSlam. But yeah, I just don't understand why Liv is in the finals of the Queen of the Ring. They gave her nothing to do, and now the one thing they're giving her to do is not a very good booking decision, in my opinion. But anyway, as Io is saying that she's going to win this match, Liv comes in and interrupts with her new theme that I'm not a huge fan fine. I understand you want a new theme music. It's not as bad as I thought it was. I think I'm getting a little more used to it. But when they were super pushing it with like the music video and everything, I was like, this is a train wreck, but I think it's okay now. It kind of fits her character. But anyway. So Liv comes out, she's cutting her promo, and I think the all time kind of gimmick in her promos is actually getting over, and I think the crowd actually started doing it with her this time. So that's, I feel like, good for her. You know, she's getting a catchphrase over. Always good to see. But she's just basically saying she's better and she's more talented than EO, so kind of just generic stuff. But then EO hits her where it hurts. EO goes, "Are you sure that that crown can fit on that big head of yours?" Which is not, which is a, kind of an elementary school insult, but coming from EO in her English, it was very funny. And I think the crowd was really into it. But then she just kind of starts yelling at her in Japanese. It was like a very odd switch up. There wasn't really anything kind of building up to that. She just says that one line and then kind of starts spitting at her in Japanese. So then Liv, of course, punches her and they brawl, of course. But actually what ends up happening is EO ends up kind of winning the brawl, and she stands tall at the end. They then have a couple of backstage segments. The first one is the same Bloodline segment they've been having for, a couple weeks at this point, where the Usos are kind of beefing with Fatu. He's telling him he only takes orders from Roman, and then they kind of they're setting up this Solo thing. They're talking about Solo, so they're setting up something with Solo versus the Bloodline. And I believe that happens later in the night. We will see. And then there is a actually pretty funny segment between Danhausen and Dominic Mysterio and JD. Dom and JD basically are shaking down Danhausen for the money that they paid him to try and curse Oba so that Dom could win the match last week. But then JD ends up getting cursed, which is not a good look for JD, The curse is undefeated to this point, and JD can't really afford to be getting cursed right now. He hasn't really done much. He's kind of showed out and showed his athleticism, but he hasn't actually won anything recently. So that curse is tough for him. I also thought it was funny that he gets shocked by that box that Danhausen is creating, but he doesn't have any previous wrestling personas to kind of catchphrase, so they kind of just drop that. He just gets shocked. And that's kind of that. Then the match between LA Knight and Jimmy Uso that was made earlier in the night starts. I think it's pretty obvious that LA Knight is going to win. I put it in my notes that surely LA Knight is going to go over tonight. During the match, there was nothing really crazy. Jimmy botches. He goes for a whisper in the wind, which I didn't even know he could do, so I guess that's something. He did the flip, but he kind of botched it. Like, I believe he's supposed to hit him with his foot in the head, and his foot was nowhere near connecting. He kind of just hit him with his hip. And then the commentators, another thing that the commentators did that kind of bothered me is they do this pretty often. They just say that there is a more aggressive version of a certain wrestler, but there is like no actual visible evidence of that. They're just doing all of the regular moves that they know, and they're just wrestling exactly how they were wrestling, but the commentators are giving them a push, and they're just saying that, oh, this is a more aggressive version of this wrestler. And they did this in the 90s. I've definitely heard them say this in the WWF era, but it just happens way more often now. I have it in my notes that they did it 3 times in this exact episode. During the Lyra match, they said she was being more aggressive. like how two different wrestlers can't use the same finisher on the same show in the same night. They gotta limit this aggressive thing. They need another kind of adjective or another way to push a wrestler on commentary. So the way that this match ends is kind of tough for LA Knight because he does go over. However, they're in like a superplex spot. Superplex spot. Him and Jimmy. He gets distracted. Solo walks out of the crowd, up to the barricade. And LA Knight kind of, redirects his attention while he's on the top turnbuckle with Jimmy. And then Jimmy pushes him off and he hits the ground and then he kind of sells an ankle injury. And he's like limping pretty bad around. And then Solo sneaks up behind Jimmy while he's still up on the top rope and he hits him with a Samoan spike. Because the ref is checking on LA Knight and his ankle, so he's not looking, and then Solo comes in and hits Jimmy with the Samoan spike, and then LA Knight just kind of takes it, he hits him with the BFT and gets the pin. And I just feel like this isn't actually, it's a win for LA Knight, but I don't think it's actually strong booking for him, considering he needed interference from Solo to beat Jimmy, who is the lowest in the food chain of the bloodline. He took an ankle injury and needed outside interference, so I just feel like this was a bad look for him once again by the booking, LA Knight booking. So after this, there is another backstage segment. It is a Judgment Day segment, and basically they've been slow burning this kind of Liv Morgan beef with Raquel since the Rumble. Before I even know they were in a faction, Liv eliminates Raquel, and the commentators note that. And so you've kind of just been waiting for the pin to drop. I feel like at least I have kind of been waiting for this beef to boil over, and it's still slowly going. You have Raquel kind of calling out Liv because she's being selfish. She only really cares about her match and what happened to her getting attacked by Io Sky. Meanwhile, everyone in the Judgment Day is kind of struggling with their own issue. You have Dom losing to Oba. You have Raquel losing to Liv. You have Roxanne not even making it to the semifinals of the Queen of the Ring. And then JD obviously just got electrocuted by Danhausen, so the Judgment Day is not really doing too hot, and Liv, as the leader, is only really concerned about herself, so she gets called on that by Raquel. And then Liv says that after she wins the Queen of the Ring and wins at SummerSlam and she is double champion, then Raquel can target Sol Ruca for the Women's Intercontinental Championship. And I feel like this could be a way to create even more beef. Like, even just her saying that, like, yeah, it sounds like she's supporting her, but saying that when she's double champion, Raquel can go and look at the Intercontinental title after she was just in a world title match with Stephanie Vicaire and in the Queen of the Ring tournament for a world title match. It seems like a pretty obvious step down, so I feel like that could definitely rub Raquel the wrong way. And then she kind of makes the plan for Dom and JD to get the title off of Penta for Dom. And I guess JD doesn't really have any beef with this because he's kind of electrocuted at the time. But then Roxanne Perez asks what their plan is for her. And then Liv kind of looks at her awkwardly, and then it's like, alright, we have to get JD to medical, and they all rush out to get JD to medical because he got electrocuted. So there's definitely some tension brewing between Liv and the two other girls of the Judgment Day. Like I said, after the Rumble, nothing really came of that, so I'm not sure how long they're going to wait to pull the trigger on this. I originally thought that this would happen a lot sooner. I thought that Liv would win the title at Mania, and then her first opponent would be Raquel, but they didn't do that, but they actually did nothing instead. But yeah, so this could go on for a while, but there is definitely going to be a falling out at some point. If it's not Roxanne, or if it's not Raquel, it'll be Roxanne. next big segment is Corey Graves interviewing Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins. He asks Seth if, since his return from injury, he has made any progress in his stated goal of destroying the Vision, and Seth kind of says, there were some bumps in the road because he has lost to Breaker a couple times, I think. Or, well, he lost at Mania because of Braun. He lost to Braun at Backlash. I don't know if he lost him again. I know he beat him once out on Raw, so I think they're actually split. But he lost at Mania, he lost at Backlash. But it's okay because now he is one win away in a steel cage match at Night of Champions from putting the Vision behind him. And that is his words. He says putting the Vision behind him, so even though you know that WWE recently has loved to drag out feuds for way too long, it is in his own words that this will be the end if he wins this match. And then Corey Graves kind of presses him, like, well, what if you don't win? And Seth has said he has found ways of getting around problems throughout his career, which I can't really speak to because Seth Rollins was still in the Shield when I stopped watching. But I do know that he pulled off the heist of the century, I believe is what they call it, on that fake injury cash-in. So I think he's just saying he has found creative ways of winning this match, although this is a steel cage match, so I'm not sure how creative you can get. And then he kind of says the infamous line that he will move on to win the title that he never lost. The title that he never lost. This is a very common refrain with former champions. It makes sense. He did not lose the title. He vacated the title because he would be injured for 6 months. However, even Becky Lynch, who literally got pinned, she literally lost the match. She still says that she never lost the title. So whenever a wrestler says this, it's kind of like, okay, whatever. I do think Seth is right when he says it, but it's kind of one of those things that you can't really say anymore, I feel like. So after this, there is a backstage segment between Chad Gable and Adam Pearce, where they're kind of hinting at Gable having a match with Penta, but then Tom comes in and is telling him he can't get a match with Penta if he can't even get his apology accepted by his friends, And then Tom asks Chad for an apology, considering Chad went around apologizing to all of the luchadors, and Tom is, of course, the AAA Mega Champion, so he is the king of the luchadors, so Chad should have to apologize to him. But, of course, Chad Gable is not going to apologize to Tom, and instead he challenges him to a match. But Tom, being a heel, he is not going to take a match that easily. So he puts up JD in his stead, saying he has to go through JD to get a match with him. And Adam Pearce makes the match for next week. It's going to be Chad Gable and JD, assuming they don't drag this electric shock storyline into next week where JD can't wrestle. Sorry. And then the final segment, the main event of the night, is a main event tag team title match between Logan Paul, Austin Theory, and Braun Breaker against the Street Profits, Montez Ford and Angelo Dawkins. A couple notes I have on this before the match starts. How were the Street Profits allowed to do the red solo cup thing? Having the red solo cup gimmick. Montez walks out with kind of like an iced out red solo cup, which is cool. Sure, not sure what that has to do with street or profit, or money. I mean, it's fun, but it's kind of like, I don't know. I thought in this PG era, I'm not sure how he got a red solo cup gimmick over, but okay, sure. And then for the Vision entrance, I was noting that I really like Breaker's new theme. At least I think it's new. I'm not sure how new it is, but I've just kind of noticed it more recently. I do like it. And then he wasn't wearing his leather jacket this week, and I feel like he's kind of doing that. I apologize if you hear in that closet behind me is a furnace and it just turned on, so I apologize if there is a bit of a background noise. But as I was saying about Braun Breaker's entrance, he is not wearing his leather jacket, and I feel like he's doing that because he doesn't want to upstage Theory, because Theory kind of has nothing in that kind of department. But I feel like he should always wear his leather jacket. Like, he should make that his thing. You know how, like, Bret Hart had the leather jacket? I feel like he should always wear that because it works for his character. You know, he's trying to be, what is it? I think the unpredictable badass, I think. Something badass, I know that. So I think the leather jacket kind of fits him. After the entrances. Oh, okay. So, one thing that I also don't like that they kind of do now that they never used to do, I'm not sure how long they've been doing it, but for title matches, they have the ring announcer announce the teams after they've already done their entrances and they're in the ring, and they kind of turn out the lights, and they're trying to do like a big fight feel kind of thing, a big fight feel. And it just doesn't work for me. I feel like it takes too long. And I feel like it kind of works better when the ring announcer is introducing them during their entrance. I feel like that kind of adds to the entrance, you know? Like when they're walking out and their music's hitting and they say their name with their, you know, special announcer voice, I feel like that works. It's more hype than slowing everything down for this. I don't really like it. As for the match itself, we can finally move on to the match itself. Apologies. The Street Profits hit their team finisher, the Blockbuster, which is kind of like a doomsday device, but, you know, a little bit upscaled. And I don't remember who they hit it on. It's probably Theory, just because, of course, they're not going to pin Braun Breaker. But anyway, they're pinning Theory, and then Logan Paul, because he is out there with the tricep. He can't wrestle, but he is still back on TV, which I think is good. You know, I think he does good heel work. But anyway, he grabs Theory's foot and puts it on the bottom rope, kind of like the BFAB spot from a couple weeks ago on SmackDown, except it's like right in front of the ref. And I guess I understand they can't disqualify them for something like that because he didn't hit anybody. But all the ref does is throw out Logan because it was right in his face, so I guess fair enough. But the match still continues, which is, you know, I'm sure Street Profits feel some type of way about that, but so Logan gets thrown out of the match. Later on, Braun is doing his clothesline thing. He has the guy set up on the announce desk. He's standing on the apron, and he like jumps real flat, like straight at him, and clotheslines him over the announce table. He's done it a couple times. But the reason that I noted it is because right after that clothesline, he box jumps onto the announce table, like really quick. I was gonna snap my fingers, but I don't want to do that into the mic. But it was like that, you know. And I'm not sure how impressive it is, because I don't really know how high the announce table is, but it looks pretty high because Braun is, you know, shorter than the average wrestler. I think that's fair to say. And he just immediately jumps effortlessly on top of the table, and he's just kind of an animal. Michael Cole, every time Braun Breaker delivers a spear, Michael Cole calls it a tornado spear, and I'm not really a fan of this. I feel like you should only call it a tornado spear if he does the one where he bounces like off the ropes a couple times and then spears him. I think calling that a tornado spear makes a lot of sense. But Michael Cole, just every single time, even if he's just in the corner, runs up, hits him with a spear, he calls it a tornado spear. I get they're trying to differentiate it, considering how many wrestlers do spears, but if they're all tornado spears, then what's the point? You know, it's just what's the point of the super tornado spear? So when we're getting closer to the finish of the match now, Logan somehow sneaks back to ringside and is going to give Theory the brass knuckles, but then Joe Hendry's theme actually hits, which was cool to see because Joe Hendry has not been on TV basically since Logan's been off TV, because their plan for Joe Hendry was the Logan feud with his song, the Fire Logan Paul song, and after Logan Paul tore his tricep, they really have nothing for Hendry, which is tough because Hendry is it's just super over and he's a really cool guy. At least his character is. I can't speak, obviously, outside of kayfabe for Joe Hendry, but he seems really nice. But there was nothing for him, so he comes out and he chases off Logan, but not before. Logan puts the brass knuckles, the brass knuckles into the ring. And then the ref is distracted. I don't quite remember why the ref is distracted, but basically he drops the brass knuckles into the ring, and he gets chased off by Joe Hendry, and then Theory sees the brass knuckles, he's crawling over to put them on, but then you hear the burn it down, and then Seth's theme starts playing. So everyone is then kind of, head on a swivel, and they're not really head on a swivel, they're actually all staring right at the entrance ramp. But then Seth jumps over the barricade, and then he actually takes the brass knuckles and punches Theory with the brass knuckles while everyone is looking at the entrance ramp. And then Braun sees Seth, and he just chases after him. He's kind of incensed, because they have their steel cage match, so he is in a blood feud with Seth. So he chases Seth as Seth runs away after hitting Theory with the knuckles. And then the Street Profits hit another team finisher. I don't think this one had a name. Dawkins kind of slams him down, and then Montez goes for like a frog splash. And then they get the 1, 2, 3, and they are the new tag team champions. There we go. See, now I'm saying it, the new tag team champions, but it's true. And it makes sense that the Vision lost these titles. Braun Breaker was never supposed to be a tag team guy. He was always the singles guy, the leader of the faction, but all of the Vision kept getting injured. So now he had to be in the tag scene. So it makes sense that he drops these tag belts, but it is tough for the Vision. They're just taking L after L, and I mean, it's not really their fault. Like, Jalen Brunson, shout out Jalen Brunson. I think his name is actually Bronson Reed. Bronson tears his bicep in, I think it was the Elimination Chamber qualifying match, which is just like a freak accident, freak injury, and then Logan tears his tricep, which wasn't really a freak injury. He kind of literally got jumped on by some guy, but it was unlucky, we'll say. So now they don't have titles, and now it's just Austin Theory and Austin Theory and Braun Breaker. So not sure what their future plans are for the Vision, but yeah, so that's kind of that. They can't hold the tag belts, but I don't really know where they're going from here after this whole Seth thing. I will make a predictions video on Night of Champions for who I think will win that match and the other matches. But that is the end of this episode of Raw. What I think I'm going to rate this, I'm not sure what. Let's go back and see the Oba promo. I'll give a point for that. The women's tag match, that's nothing really. Chad Gable, Alpha Academy, not really gonna care too much about that either. Let's see the Page match, maybe get a point. I don't know. Let's say maybe, I don't know, it's my first time rating one of these. I'm not sure of the scale yet, but I will give it maybe a 4. a 4 out of 10. That feels too harsh because when I was watching it, I wasn't like, this sucks, but I just feel like the women's tag match was kind of a big thing that didn't really hit. The Alpha Academy, I don't really know them very well, so it's hard for me to get up for that. Ethan Page is fun. I like seeing Ethan Page. I like seeing EO. None of the matches were very shocking in their ending. I would say that the World Tag Team Championship, I didn't know who would win. It could have went either way. But there was no Roman, there's no Paul Heyman, there's no Punk, but we kind of knew that he's been gone. So I'll give it a 5 out of 10. We'll go from there. We'll start right in the middle for the first episode that I'm reviewing, and we'll kind of go from there. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my first video. I'm looking over it. It seems to have been a long one. Let me know if anyone is watching it to this point. Let me know if you like the long videos or if I need to take less bullet points in my notes while I'm watching these shows, which I guess would save me time as well, so I wouldn't be terribly mad at that. But yeah, I didn't really expect to be talking for an hour. But yeah, this was a good time spending some time with you guys going over this show. I will hopefully have a different camera. I'm using my webcam. Oh, you can see. I'm also sweating in this room because I turned off all of the fans. I am in a basement apartment and there is no air. Well, there is an air conditioner. There's a window air conditioner. But for the background noise and the ASMR of it all, I turned off the fans and the air conditioner. So that is why throughout I've been progressively getting sweatier and sweatier during this recording. But yeah, hopefully by the next video I will have a different camera, hopefully a little bit better quality. I was going to use my phone, but my phone is too low battery to record an hour-long video right now. And yeah, definitely let me know the audio as well, the volume. I think I have it figured out to a decent volume, but obviously my first video, and especially my first ASMR video, I have actually posted videos on YouTube before, but this is my first ASMR video, so let me know if it's too quiet or too loud. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will be posting an NXT review hopefully tomorrow. The goal is to get that up because obviously tomorrow is Friday, tomorrow is SmackDown, so posting an NXT on the same night as SmackDown and NXT review is kind of tough, but it is what it is. I kind of got stalled this week trying to record. But yeah, there is a lot of WWE content, so hopefully I will be able to get these videos pumping now that I kind of have my audio and my video, I think, figured out. Again, let me know if it's not. But yeah, so in the coming days, NXT review, SmackDown review, and hopefully a Night of Champions preview and picks before that show goes live. Video all coming out in the next couple days. And then maybe I'll slow it down and get the Night of Champions reviews out and the Great American Bash review out a little bit later. But yeah, have a good night, and thank you guys for watching. Peace.